Just moments before the wheels left the tarmac, a trained canine broke formation and lunged toward the front of the aircraft, ignoring every order, every command. He wasn't acting on instinct. He was reacting to something no one else could see. When he clawed open a hidden panel behind the cockpit wall, what lay inside silenced the entire crew and brought the flight to the brink of disaster. Want to know how it ended and what he found? Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe and let us know in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? And what would you have done in Ethan's place? The terminal lights buzzed faintly overhead, bathing the corridor of Gate C12 in a muted fluorescence that somehow made the early morning air feel heavier than it was. Officer Ethan Rourke moved with the ease of a man who had long since given up the notion of sleep. His boots struck the polished floor with deliberate rhythm, the echo following him like a memory he couldn't quite shake. Beside him walked Rex, his partner, a Belgian Malinois with the build of a soldier and the eyes of something older, almost elemental. The leash between them was mostly symbolic. Rex had long since learned Ethan's pace, mood, and intent through nothing more than breath and presence. It was 4:17. The airport was still in its hush before the storm lull, a brief window where the red-eye flights had all but emptied and the domestic rush hadn't yet arrived. Security teams moved like shadows, unnoticed and unacknowledged, their presence both invisible and indispensable. Ethel preferred it that way. He wasn't here to be thanked. He was here to prevent the kind of headlights no one ever wanted to read. "Rex heel," he said softly, not because the dog needed to be told, but because the sound of his own voice grounded him. Rex glanced up, ears flicking once. They had just completed a sweep of the secured loading corridor leading to Flight 413, an early charter scheduled for private federal transport. The manifest was locked down under clearance Ethan wasn't privy to, but the presence of a federal witness protection liaison earlier that morning had been clue enough. Something serious was in motion. As they rounded the corner to the maintenance hatch access point, Rex's head lifted sharply. His body stiffened, not the dramatic posturing of a typical alert, but a shift so subtle Ethan almost missed it. The dog's ears pricked forward, his nostrils flaring once, then again. "What is it, boy?" Veering gently toward the bulkhead wall beside the closed maintenance panel. He sniffed it slowly, intently, and then emitted a low rumble, not a growl, not quite, but something deeper. A vibration, a warning. Ethan's brows furrowed. He knelt beside his partner and traced his fingers along the panel's edge. It was sealed, latched from the inside, standard for aircraft secured the night before. But Rex didn't pull back. His breath huffed out once, then he nudged the panel lightly with his "Gate maintenance cleared this last night," Ethan said aloud to himself, though mostly to Rex. The dog tilted his head. Ethan reached for his tablet and pulled up the overnight logs. Something was off. Maintenance record, access granted at 0:39 hours. Routine systems diagnostics on electrical feed line signed off by a tech named Calder Evers. Ethan paused. He tapped deeper into the access log. The clearance used was still active in the system, which meant someone had logged into the airport system under Evers's ID and run a false diagnostic session on the plane, that someone had entered the aircraft under the radar. "Shit," Ethan muttered. He tapped his comms. "Dispatch, this is Officer Rourke, requesting verification on maintenance entry at Gate C12. Last night's technician ID reads Calder Evers. Can you confirm?" "Stand by," came the reply, distant and tinny. Ethan looked back to Rex, who now sat squarely in front of the panel, unmoving, eyes fixed on the metal door like it was breathing. That behavior was new. Rex had never frozen like that before. Not unless... Chemical scent. The thought came unbidden. Chlorine compounds, military grade. Ethan remembered Syria. Remembered the bodies they'd found in the underground chamber of that burnt-out hospital. The air had smelled of metal and ghost skin. Rex had been younger then, less disciplined. But even back then he had sensed it, things the rest of them couldn't see or name. "Dispatch," the voice crackled back, confirming Calder Evers retired 6 weeks ago. Security badge shows inactive but somehow was reactivated yesterday at 23:41. Last known access was Gate C12. Ethan's spine stiffened. He tapped his badge. "I need the flight deck secured, no boarding until further notice." Possible unauthorized access. Copy that. Security en route. Rex finally shifted, standing slowly. His muscles were taut beneath his vest, his head still turned toward the panel. Ethan placed a hand gently on his side. We're not alone, huh? The dog didn't move. They waited. The airport continued to breathe its quiet, mechanical rhythm. Somewhere overhead, the PA system welcomed a Delta flight arriving from Houston. But here, beside this sealed panel, in the cold corner of Gate C12, something had already begun unraveling. Something that smelled of chemical ghosts and forged names. Ethan didn't know what they would find behind that panel. But Rex did. Rex always did. The door to the jet bridge hissed open as Ethan stepped into the narrow fuselage of the Boeing 737, his boots tapping lightly against the synthetic flooring. Rex moved just ahead, alert but not agitated, his motion fluid as a shadow sliding beneath starlight. The scent trail had drawn them from the maintenance panel all the way to the front of the aircraft. And Ethan's instincts, the kind honed not from manuals but from battlefield compromise, tightened like wire behind his ribs. The cabin was empty for now, except for a single flight attendant prepping the galley and Captain Adrian Wolf standing at the edge of the cockpit, his arms crossed and demeanor clipped with impatience. "You said we'd be quick, Officer Rourke," Wolf said, his voice low and pressed, like he was trying not to let it bleed into irritation. "I've got a timeline and a storm cell building over Nevada. What exactly are we looking for here?" Ethan didn't answer right away. His eyes followed Rex's movements. The dog had bypassed the galley and now stood completely still near the cockpit threshold, head lowered, nostrils working the thin strip of rubber along the floor where the cockpit bulkhead met the cabin. Then, like a note plucked from some silent string, Rex emitted a sound Ethan had never heard from him in the field. It wasn't a growl. It wasn't a bark. It was a quiet, drawn-out thread of breath, laced with something old and instinctual. Ethan's blood chilled. That sound, trained and reserved for one kind of scenario only, was what they called a dead zone marker. Rex had used it only once before, in the caves outside Aleppo, when they stumbled on a mass grave covered by sand and acid dust. Ethan crouched beside him, placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "What is it, partner?" Rex didn't respond. His body was motionless, tail low, ears twitching but locked forward. Ethan glanced up, his voice directed toward Wolf now, more firm than before. "We need to inspect the cockpit." Wolf narrowed his eyes. "That's not going to happen. Pre-hate system check is halfway done and my co-pilot's logging nav protocols. You've had your sweep. I can't hold up this flight any longer. Not unless you've got something concrete." Ethan stood slowly, his jaw ticking once. "We have an anomaly. The dog's not just reacting, he's giving a dead zone signal." "Your dog sniffed a floor mat," Wolf replied, expression tightening. "That's not an anomaly. That's canine behavior. And I've got a manifest with a secured passenger who needs to be in San Francisco by noon. This delay's already been flagged at the tower. Then tell me who the passenger is." Ethan shot back, already knowing the request would be stonewalled. The captain stiffened. "That information is restricted to federal security clearance and above." "I'm part of the security team," Ethan said. "I'm the one assigned to clear this aircraft. If there's someone on board that warrants special protocol, I need to know if they're a target or a threat." "They're neither," Wolf said flatly. "They're protected." The exchange left no room to push further without escalation, and Ethan knew it, but every nerve in his body screamed the same thing Rex had. Something wasn't right. Wolf turned and stepped back into the cockpit, leaving the door ajar just wide enough for Ethan to glimpse the co-pilot, a woman in her 30s hunched over her instruments, typing steadily, headphones on. Rex shifted then, just slightly, stepping a single paw forward, toward the threshold. He didn't growl, didn't bark, but Ethan could see it. His breathing had changed. Faster, shallow, not fear, tension. "Captain," Ethan said sharply, stepping closer. "Give me 5 minutes. If nothing's there, you board and fly. But if there is, and we ignore it, this becomes a federal negligence case." Wolf paused, just for a second. Then, "You've got two." Ethan gestured and Rex moved with precision, nose working the floor, the door frame, the metal panel around the entry. He made no sound now, just slow, methodical inspection. The silence pressed in. The co-pilot turned slightly but didn't interrupt. Wolf crossed his arms. Ethan ran his hand over the panel where Rex paused, sniffing the edge of the wall beneath the main switchboard. Nothing stood out, no loose wires, no unusual heat signature. He moved to the jump seat, crouching low to check the paneling under the flooring. Rex sniffed and paused again, then looked up at Ethan and licked his lip. It was a subtle cue, a signal used during chemical tracing. The scent was present but masked. Ethan reached into his vest and withdrew a strip of reactive tape, pressing it briefly to the floor. No change. Whatever was here wasn't biological or explosive, it was something else. "Time's up," Wolf said curtly. "I need you and your dog out of my cockpit." Ethan stood slowly, holding Wolf's gaze. "This isn't over. Something's not right here, then log it. But we're pushing back in 20. He closed the door behind him with a firm click. Ethan stepped back into the cabin with Rex beside him, fuming silently. The dog sat near the forward bulkhead, posture taut, eyes still fixed on the door like he was waiting for it to move again. A moment later, the flight attendant approached, clipboard in hand, forced smile on her face. "Officer Wark, we're preparing for boarding. Will your partner be riding up here with the secure team?" "Yeah," Ethan muttered, distracted. "You'll be here." As the woman turned away, Ethan crouched beside Rex again, lowering his voice to a whisper. "You're still picking it up, aren't you?" Rex blinked once, then resumed his silent vigil. Ethan leaned back against the wall, pulling up the flight manifest on his tablet. Most of it was blacked out, placeholders where names should be. But he saw the one entry marked Priority Federal Escort, and beside it, the only piece of data not redacted, a seat assignment, 1A, first class, front row, right across from the cockpit door. His eyes narrowed. Whatever this was, it wasn't random. Someone wanted a direct line to that cockpit. Ethan's pulse ticked faster. He looked at Rex, who hadn't moved an inch. Outside the aircraft, the first wave of passengers began to filter into the gate area, dragging carry-ons, sipping coffees, lost in phones. The PA system buzzed with a boarding announcement. But Ethan's mind wasn't on the crowd, it was on the sealed door behind him, and the scent only one creature on Earth seemed able to detect. Something inside that cockpit wasn't just dangerous, it was waiting. Ethan stood just outside the forward galley, eyes fixed on the sealed cockpit door, his jaw clenched, his hand instinctively brushing the grip of his service-issued multi-tool clipped to his vest. Behind him, Rex sat rigid, unblinking, still facing the cockpit with a tension that had not eased since they boarded. The atmosphere inside the aircraft had shifted almost imperceptibly, but it was like the oxygen itself had grown denser, heavier, as if the plane were holding its breath. Boarding had begun in stages, and passengers were now moving down the jet bridge, filtered through federal marshals who checked IDs with a precision sharpened by experience. First class was being filled with government agents and two nondescript men in plain gray suits who flanked the witness, an older man with a slumped posture and wary eyes. Ethan barely glanced at them. His attention remained fixed on the layout of the space, the corridor, the bulkhead, the panel seams. He couldn't shake the image of Rex's unrelenting gaze and that eerie dead zone whimper from earlier. Something was out of place. He moved back toward the cockpit, not to request access again. He knew Wolf would deny it, but to observe. His eyes scanned every detail, and that's when he saw it. Just beneath the captain's seat, barely visible behind the co-pilot's console, was a sealed electrical maintenance panel, identical in design to those he'd seen on hundreds of aircraft. But something wasn't right. The screws anchoring the panel weren't standard issue. Airport maintenance protocols mandated stainless steel screws with safety grooves designed for torque calibration, color-coded with thermal indicators to detect pressure variance after cabin pressurization cycles. But the screws in front of him were matte black with a narrow hexagonal head, something used in European defense systems, not domestic aviation. Ethan leaned slightly closer, pretending to inspect the cockpit boundary for a routine structural integrity check. He snapped a quick photo with his service tablet, then walked back to his jump seat beside Rex, who still hadn't moved. Ethan opened the maintenance manual stored on his secure app and compared the photo to the standard panel design. The mismatch was blatant. Whoever had sealed that panel had gone to extreme lengths to make it look unaltered. But they'd used the wrong hardware. It was subtle, intentional. The kind of oversight made only when someone assumed no one would look that closely. As he processed that detail, Rex finally shifted. The dog's ears twitched. His head turned, not toward the cockpit this time, but to the cabin ceiling just above the aisle. A small black dome protruded from the corner, one of the built-in security cameras mounted to cover the cockpit entrance and first-class cabin. Rex stared at it, eyes locked, body unnaturally still. Ethan followed the dog's gaze. The camera's indicator light was on, blinking green, operational. Nothing unusual, but Rex kept staring. No, this was something else. Slowly, Ethan tapped into the aircraft's onboard surveillance system through his authorization code, pulling up the real-time camera feed from the cockpit corridor. The footage looked clean. Passengers boarding, agents in place, the witness now seated. But when Ethan rewound to the previous hour, back to when he and Rex first entered, the timestamp glitched. A 1-second skip, then another, and then an abrupt jump. 4:19 to 4:34.15 minutes gone. The feed didn't even stutter. It had been cut, replaced, and resequenced. No blur, no trace. Only Rex had noticed. Ethan's heartbeat began to pick up. He reran the footage from other angles. A side-view camera facing the galley should have captured their walk through the corridor. But at the same moment, the forward feed skipped. This one cut to a black screen with a brief, "You saw it before I did," he whispered to Rex. The dog blinked once, then resumed his statue-like posture. Ethan tapped into the flight operations log. The maintenance record from the night before had already raised questions. But now he searched deeper. The login used to access the camera system carried a badge number. Tech Operator 2912. Registered to a subcontractor named Linton Avasco. Ethan's breath caught. He recognized the name. Avasco wasn't just any technician. He was flagged in an internal security memo 6 months ago for suspected data tampering in a joint homeland investigation. Charges dismissed due to sufficient evidence after the key witness disappeared. Ethan checked the airport roster. Avasco was not scheduled to be on site last night, yet someone had used his credentials to access and edit security footage less than 3 hours ago. He clenched the tablet. "You're not trying to blow this plane up," he muttered under his breath. "They're trying to hide something inside it." A new voice crackled in his earpiece. Marshal Coordinator Beck. "Rourke, we're sealed and ready for final clearance. Need you to greenlight before pushback." Ethan didn't answer right away. He stared back at the cockpit. The panel, the altered screws, the cut footage. His eyes returned to Rex, who finally broke his gaze from the camera, exhaled audibly, then turned his head slowly toward the front right corner where the jump seat sat flush against the avionics wall. It wasn't just scent now. It was sound, vibration, presence. Ethan rose slowly, fingers curling against his vest strap. "Delay pushback," he whispered, not loud enough for the marshals to hear. He was already moving forward again, eyes scanning the aisle, each step feeling like it echoed louder than the last. Somewhere or someone was waiting to be found. Ethan stood with both feet planted firm just outside the cockpit. Tablet in one hand, his other resting unconsciously on the top of Rex's harness. He had just pulled the access data, the camera logs, the panel discrepancy, and the technician's flagged ID. The pieces weren't just coincidences, they were warning signs. He knew it, Rex knew it, but the people around them, the crew, the captain, even the marshal stationed in the cabin, were staring at him like he'd lost his grip on reality. "Officer Rourke," Captain Wolf said, voice clipped and tense, "this is now your third disruption in less than 30 minutes. We are on an FAA-secured schedule and cannot accommodate random searches based on dog behavior and your personal hunches." Ethan didn't flinch. "This isn't a hunch. We have missing footage, unauthorized access to maintenance logs, and a modified panel inside your cockpit. My partner is trained to detect chemical compounds and human presence, and he hasn't left that spot since we arrived. You want to tell me that's normal?" Wolf stepped forward, his uniform crisp, the stripes on his shoulder glinting beneath the cabin light. "All due respect, what I want is to get this plane off the ground before the storm front shuts us down. This is not your jurisdiction. We have marshals, we have manifest clearance, we have a secure witness on board who cannot be delayed any longer." A flight supervisor moved into the space, her badge swinging slightly as she stepped between Ethan and the cockpit. "Sir," she said, forcing composure into her tone, "we've logged 2 delays directly tied to your activity. If you cannot present formal cause for further disruption, we'll be forced to file an incident report with airport authority. You're impeding a federal transport." "You want formal cause?" Ethan said, raising his voice only slightly. "He is an unauthorized tampering of security systems, an anomalous canine alert that matches chemical exposure markers, and a mechanical modification in a sealed compartment on an FA-classified aircraft. If that doesn't warrant a secondary inspection, then maybe we should talk about who's liable if this flight goes down." The supervisor raised her chin. "Then log it. But in the meantime, unless you present a federal override, I need your signature here acknowledging you've been made aware of internal protocol violations. You will relinquish cabin access once this is signed." She extended the tablet. The screen glowed with a standard form titled Incident Acknowledgement, Unjustified Operational Disruption. Ethan stared at it, a deep, cold pulse thudding in the side of his neck. He'd been in combat zones, interrogations, internal affairs reviews, but this moment, this bureaucratic ambush in the sterile, humming silence of a passenger aircraft, felt uniquely suffocating. "You're covering something," he said under his breath, not loud enough for them to react. Then he looked down. Rex was no longer still. The dog had risen. His body was stiff, tail down, legs square beneath him like stone pillars, his head lifted toward the cockpit again, ears flat back, mouth slightly open. Not a snarl, not a warning bark, but the split-second precursor to something primal. Ethan's breath caught. "Back up," he said, just as Rex exploded into motion. The Malinois launched with trained efficiency, claws hitting the floor in rapid succession as he lunged forward, teeth bared not in aggression but determination. He jumped and struck the lower portion of the cockpit bulkhead, paws hammering directly against the back panel just behind the captain's seat, right where Ethan had seen those odd screws. "Rex," Ethan shouted, already moving. The force of the dog's hit echoed through the confined space like a gunshot. The passengers in first class gasped. One of the marshals half rose from his seat, hand instinctively going to his sidearm. But Ethan threw a hand up, blocking the path. "Hold position, he's not attacking, he's alerting." Rex was now clawing furiously at the panel, growling in a way Ethan had only heard during capture drills. Low, vibrating, filled with urgency. Captain Wolf came storming out of the cockpit, face red. "You the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped. "Get that dog under control." Ethan stepped in front of him. "You're found something. You're gonna stop right there and watch? Your animal just damaged a federal aircraft. He just saved it." The two men stared at each other, the din around them rising, the startled murmurs of passengers, the hiss of the PA speaker as a flight attendant tried to calm the cabin. Then one of the screws dislodged, not because Ethan moved, not because someone tampered with it, but because Rex's paw had caught the edge just right, twisting it out of its slot like it was barely anchored. The panel shifted. A faint clicking sound echoed behind it. "Don't touch it," Ethan said quickly, raising a hand toward Wolf, who had instinctively moved forward. "There's something behind that panel, and I don't think it's just wiring." The marshal now approached with more focus. "What exactly are we looking at, officer?" "I don't know yet," Ethan replied, reaching for his flashlight. He had got a trained detection canine ripping at a flight panel sealed with unauthorized parts, a 15-minute hole in the camera logs, and a tech who's supposed to be off the grid using his badge to access this plane. "And the witness?" the marshal asked, eyeing the front row where the gray-suited men had now risen protectively in front of the slouched older man. "He's not the target," Ethan said, but even as he said it, he wasn't sure. He was starting to suspect the opposite. "He's the decoy." The panel made another soft noise. This time it shifted visibly, half an inch outward, just enough for Ethan to see the dark seam where something had been forced open from the inside. He leaned in, flashlight angled low, and saw it, just for a second, a shadow behind the wire, not a wire, not a pipe, something smooth still waiting. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice, and from deep within the belly of the cockpit wall a faint exhale of air, mechanical, deliberate, leaked into the silence. Ethan straightened slowly, his hands still tight around the flashlight, his other arm extending to pull Rex gently back. The dog resisted but obeyed, muscles twitching beneath his vest. "Everyone out of the forward cabin," Ethan said firmly. "Right now." "On what grounds?" Wolf snapped again, but his voice cracked this time, just slightly. Ethan didn't answer. He was already reaching for his radio, thumbing the emergency override. His eyes never left the panel as it shifted again, just slightly, like something inside was pressing back. Ethan's radio crackled in his ear as the dispatcher requested confirmation for the emergency override, but he ignored it, eyes fixed on the panel that now gaped open like a mouth too long clenched shut. The faint hiss of air had stopped, but the silence it left behind was even more deafening. Captain Wolf stood frozen just behind him, face pale, eyes darting from the loosened screws to the black void yawning from behind the flight console. "This is a violation of every air protocol I've ever flown," Wolf muttered, but his voice had lost its edge, replaced with something brittle. Ethan didn't respond. He was already down on one knee, flashlight cutting into the darkness inside the panel. Behind the mess of colored wires and circuitry, a narrow opening stretched into the frame of the aircraft, a crawlspace barely wider than a man's shoulders, sheathed in dull aluminum for fiber insulation, clearly not built for human occupation. Yet it had been modified, subtly, deliberately. A section of the wiring had been rerouted along the side, leaving just enough space to slither through. There were scuff marks along the inner wall, irregular indentations from the pressure of knees, elbows, boots. A trace of friction, a trace of presence. Ethan reached in carefully, not to touch anything yet, but to test the air. It smelled stale, sweat, metal, something else sharp and chemical like ammonia soaked into cloth. "Rex, stay," he ordered, rising just enough to wave down the approaching ground technician who had responded to the emergency code. "Toolkit now. I need extraction gear, fiber scope, and a containment stretcher on standby." The tech blinked, confused, until he saw the open panel and paled. "On it," he stammered, disappearing back toward the service hatch. One of the marshals moved forward, voice low. "You really think someone's in there?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he knelt again, leaned closer, and called out into the narrow channel. "If you can hear me, you need to remain still. We're coming to extract you. Do not move." Nothing. The silence pressed back like a presence. Then, a faint scrape. Something shifted within the darkness. Ethan's breath locked in his throat. "Confirmed movement," he said, standing up. "Get medical prepped. This person may be unconscious or compromised." The technician returned with a compact fiber scope, and Ethan fed the tiny camera into the panel, threading it carefully past the wiring and into the crawlspace. The screen flickered, then resolved into focus. There, at the very end of the passage, curled into a grotesque position like a puppet folded too many times, was a man. He was wedged between bulkhead frames, spine bent, shoulder visibly dislocated, his right arm trembling weakly. His face was slick with sweat and grime, the skin pale and waxy, and between his teeth was a tightly packed cloth, soaked and yellowed, held in place like a lifeline to his eyes, wide and frantic, blinked against the lens light, pupils blown wide with terror or sedation. "Jesus," the marshal whispered. Ethan's voice stayed flat. "We've got a live body, male, approximate age 40 to 50, unconscious or fading." He reached in with both hands now, motioning to the technician to help secure the support frame. They couldn't just drag the man out. They had to be precise, careful not to collapse the structure. The extraction took nearly 6 minutes, each second tighter than the last. They had to loosen the flooring, disconnect 2 relay panels, and use a makeshift sled to pull the man inch by inch into the cabin. The body unfolded like something unnatural, limbs too long, bones protruding where muscle should have been. Ethan supported the man's head as they finally slid him free, noticing the bruises on his temples, the blood crusting one ear, the rough welts around his wrists. "Check for wires," he ordered sharply. He may be strapped with something, but there were no explosives, no weapon, just a single compact pouch taped to his inner thigh, which, when removed, revealed a rolled blueprint of the plane's electrical schematic, with handwritten modifications annotated in red ink. Ethan crouched beside him, gently pulling the soaked cloth from the man's mouth. The stench of chloroform hit the air like a ghost. The man coughed barely. His lips moved. Ethan leaned in closer. What did they put in here? Who are you? The man's eyes rolled, then settled. His voice came out like dry paper. Not alone. What? Ethan pressed. The man blinked, breath catching. Then fell limp. Ethan felt the chill ripple through him as the paramedics swarmed in, checking vitals, preparing adrenaline, oxygen. The man was still alive, but barely. Wolf stood in the aisle, pale as the fuselage. You mean to tell me he's been in my cockpit wall this whole time? Not just in it, Ethan muttered, standing slowly, eyes scanning the cabin again. He had a map of your systems. He wasn't hiding, he was waiting. Waiting for what? Wolf asked, voice breaking slightly. Ethan didn't answer. He was already turning, looking down the aisle, scanning the faces, the corners, the unlit recesses of the plane. If the man was telling the truth, if he wasn't alone, then this wasn't just an infiltration. This was a coordination, a setup, a mission still in motion, and they had just cracked open the beginning. The medics worked in silence, only the clipped sounds of zippers and equipment exchanges, breaking the tension as they loaded the unconscious man onto a stretcher, his limbs still twitching slightly from the aftermath of stress, chemicals, and forced containment. Ethan stood nearby, one hand resting on Rex's back, the other clutching the schematic blueprint retrieved from the pouch on the man's leg. He said in a tone of leafy face of the stretchered stranger. Though the man's eyes were closed now, features slackened, mouth parted in that unsettling half-conscious limbo between life and shutdown. One of the security agents approached with a tablet in hand, face pale but steady, his voice low as he handed it to Ethan. Preliminary facial match just came back through Interpol Crosscut, he said. Positive ID. Dmitry Orlov. Ethan's pulse skipped. He recognized the name. You're sure? 100%, the agent said. It's a confirmed match. Former GRU specialist, turned contract operative. Known for disappearing mid-transit inside aircraft infrastructure. He's pulled stunts like this before. 3 disappearances across Eastern Europe tied to him. Only this time, we caught him alive. Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of what that meant. Orlov wasn't just a name on a watch list. He was a ghost. A trained killer who specialized in weaponizing patients. Inserting himself into spaces no human should fit. Waiting like a sleeper virus inside steel bones until the moment was right. The blueprint in Ethan's hand was confirmation of intent. He wasn't hiding. He was positioned. But for what? And then the marshal leaned closer, his voice even lower now. Rourke, there's more. Surveillance playback from 2 cabin angles just flagged a red marker. One of the crew's missing. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Which one? Flight attendant Sienna Kroll. Registered with the charter company 6 months ago. Clean record, nothing unusual until now. But during the chaos after Orlov was pulled out, she never reported to her designated station. She's not accounted for in the last 3 passenger checks. And the camera? Ethan asked, already moving toward the closest access terminal. The marshal followed, tapping on his tablet to bring up the relevant feed. Camera 315 rear cabin picked up her movement. No one noticed in the confusion. She slipped past the marshals under pretense of assisting medical crew, then veered left into the auxiliary panel hallway. Ethan watched the footage appear, grainy but clear enough. Sienna moved with eerie composure, her uniform still neatly pressed, her body language calm. Too calm for someone in the middle of a potential onboard emergency. Her hand hovered just slightly over her side, where she wore a compact pouch most flight staff used for ID badges, but hers appeared bulkier. At 7:41 and 2 seconds, she passed the last passenger, turned at the corner where the lavatory met the rear service bay, and disappeared from the frame. The timestamp stopped, the feed jumped forward, 7:42 and 17 seconds. She was gone. Where's the oxygen storage? Ethan asked sharply. That's the only blind spot after the cabin. Deck 4, the marshal said. Cargo adjacent, under the auxiliary supply unit. It's insulated and sound dampened, practically invisible unless you're looking for it. She knew exactly where to go, Ethan said. That's not an escape, that's a fallback point. He turned to Wolf, who stood watching the monitor with a face that had gone slack with disbelief. You vetted this crew? Wolf nodded slowly. Standard checks, nothing flagged. She had Delta clearances, recent flight hours logged. She was clean. Not clean, Ethan corrected. Smart, embedded. And if Orlov was the distraction, she's the actual threat. What could she do back there? Wolf asked, voice thin. It's just storage. He's also wired into the auxiliary electrical grid. With enough time and tools, she could tap into nav comms, emergency pressure release valves. Hell, if she has access to backup power, she could override your entire systems from the rear deck. You've never had that level of infiltration on a commercial aircraft, the marshal said, his face hardening. Until now, Ethan turned back to Rex, who had been watching the exchange with quiet intensity. The dog stood, ears high, body angled toward the aft corridor. He gave a short, deliberate chuff. He's already on her trail, he said. Let's move. He grabbed his comm and keyed into the flight ops channel. This is Officer Rourke. Lock down rear access from external entry. Suspend cabin movement from row 25 back. We've got a hostile embedded in crew disguise and she's mobile. Confirmed, came the immediate reply, tension crackling in the dispatcher's voice. Deploying ground security to exterior hatch now. As Ethan moved down the aisle, he passed the first-class rows now shrouded in a tense silence. The gray-suited marshals shielding their witness with full-body posture, weapons holstered but unsnapped. The other passengers stared wide-eyed, some clinging to their armrests, others filming discreetly. The air had turned sharp, electric, like right before a lightning strike. At the rear of the plane, Ethan found the entry to the oxygen storage hatch closed, sealed with a twist-lock mechanism. No one visible. He crouched, motioning for Rex to sniff the base of the door. The dog's nose twitched. Then he growled low, not the dead-on tone, not chemical, but human. Close? Ethan nodded once. Then he reached into his vest, pulled free a compact breach sensor and tapped the panel. Inside, the screen lit up, displaying body heat. A single figure crouched low, knees pulled in, hands moving toward something compact at her waist. She's arming something, Ethan muttered. Or communicating. Should we storm it? The marshal behind him asked. Not yet, Ethan said. If she's wired in, one wrong move could black out the cockpit or worse. He watched the figure on the screen shift again. Deliberate, slow, like someone who knew every second counted. Then, to his surprise, the figure looked directly at the breach panel, as if she could see him through it, and she smiled. Ethan stared at the breach panel where the heat signature still lingered, but the figure had moved, just enough to vanish from the center of the display, slipping sideways in a direction not accounted for on the basic deck layout. He tapped the sensor again, recalibrating, but the silhouette didn't reappear. A dead zone. She moved. The technician behind him hesitated, hands fumbling with the override kit, until Ethan pushed him aside and drove the manual crank into the hatch's emergency slot. With a metallic groan, the door released, swinging outward into the narrow compartment saturated with the stale tang of compressed oxygen and the faintest whiff of solvent. Rex entered first, snout sweeping side to side, ears back, body low. Fast and followed fast, flashlight cutting through the shadows, every muscle in his body bracing for movement. A trap, a gunshot, but the space was empty. Storage units along the side walls had been pried open, insulation stripped, wiring disturbed, and in the center of the compartment, resting atop a discarded maintenance clipboard, was a matte pistol with a suppressor, its chamber empty, and next to it a folded sheet of paper sealed with red tape. Ethan snatched it up, unrolling it quickly. It was a full schematic flight plan, backup vectors, transponder routing, alternate airport codes, and scribbled across the margins in tight, precise lettering were override protocols, altitude shifts, and one chilling phrase circled 3 times in black ink. Altitude Zaziwak's last journey, no. At that exact moment, his earpiece burst into static, followed by the urgent voice of First Officer Dana Liu from the cockpit. Control override compromised. We've got a flight path anomaly on the auto-nav. Course correction initiated without manual input. Define anomaly, Ethan snapped, heart pounding. Autopilot has been engaged with a foreign vector protocol, Dana continued, her voice clipped with alarm. Primary heading now reads 247 over the Pacific Corridor, well beyond San Francisco airspace. ETA projects us into a dead radio zone in less than 90 minutes. Are you saying someone hijacked the route from inside Nix? They didn't use cockpit controls, they patched in remotely. From secondary relay access, this is intentional. Can you kill the route manually? Not without a full reboot, Dana said. Which means disengaging altitude stabilization. We're flying into turbulence in this cell. That's a risk to everyone on board. Ethan turned, scanning the hatch frame, noting the wires now dangling from the auxiliary relay junction. She had connected a transmitter, bridged it into the flight management system, then slipped out through a secondary access point, likely into the avionics bay that ran below the galley. She's not just a handler, he said aloud. He's trained, military grade. This was coordinated with Orlov from the start. What do we do? The marshal asked, his voice dropping. Ethan looked at him, jaw tightening. We find her before this aircraft disappears off the radar. He stormed back into the cabin. Rex closed at his heel, pausing only to speak into the comm for ground control. Patch me into tower ops. Secure frequency. Tell them Flight 413 is under internal systems breach and no longer maintaining standard nav integrity. Copy, the dispatcher replied. Static crackling. We're looping in FA intercept. No, Ethan cut in. Not yet. We don't provoke an air response unless we lose full control. We're still inside USARCASRA front. As he reached the midpoint of the aisle, his eyes swept across the passengers, many now gripping their armrests, others whispering anxiously to each other. Phones clutched tight, though no signal could be found this far above. The marshals at the front had drawn closer to the protected witness, tension in their eyes. One leaned toward Ethan. Is she trying to kill him? No, Ethan answered without hesitation. He's trying to trade him. For what? Access, leverage, or silence, whatever it is that happens when we're off grid. That's why she rerouted us. She needs time and sky where no one's watching. Suddenly, the overhead lights dimmed, just briefly, then flickered back to full. A systems hiccup. Ethan's gut clenched. She's still inside, he muttered. She's navigating through the systems manually now, which means she's moving through the avionics frame. He tapped his tablet, loading the schematics, eyes scanning the crawlspace diagrams. There were only 3 ways to get from the auxiliary storage to the avionics bay, and one of them passed directly under the cargo hold, the very section that hadn't been swept due to time constraints. I need visual on the underdeck now, he said. Patch in bellycam feed. Working, the tech responded from cockpit support. Bringing up footage. Hang on. The screen loaded, then burst to life with a grainy but functional infrared feed of the lower avionics corridor. Nothing moved, until the 6th frame. A blur of motion. Just a shadow at first, but then unamassably a human figure sliding along the maintenance rail tucked low, moving fast. Hanging so? Gabriel said, his voice flat. Heading forward. Forward to the cockpit, Ethne replied. If she gets in before we regain nav control, she doesn't need to crash this plane. She can land it wherever she wants. Rex gave a sudden sharp bark, startling the nearest passenger. Ethan looked down, saw the dog staring toward the galley bulkhead again, ears high, body trembling with restrained tension. She's closer than we think. Ethan looked at the marshal, then at the cockpit, then back at the floor. He's coming up. She's coming up through the floor. The moment Ethan's voice confirmed the suspected location of the infiltrator moving through the avionics bay, First Officer Dana Liu related directly to Captain Wolf, who stood stiffly at the center console, arms locked behind his back in a posture that disguised the tremble in his fingertips. We're not halting course, Wolf said coldly, his voice steady but his eyes evasive, without absolute confirmation of hostile threat. The FAA's already monitoring, and the pressurization cycle is in progress. We breach the deck now. We risk decompression, system failure, and panic at 35,000 feet. Ethan stepped forward, anger rising in the hollow of his chest. You have a trained saboteur manipulating your systems from inside your own aircraft. I just pulled a Black Ops operative out of your cockpit wall, and one of your crew is missing with a suppressed weapon and a reroute map to international dead zones. What more confirmation do you need? Wolf didn't flinch. The passenger manifest remains intact. Your so-called saboteur hasn't made contact with the cockpit, hasn't issued any threat, and your K9 hasn't made a formal explosive or biohazard alert. What we have is a series of isolated events stitched together by your field instincts, not protocol. My field instincts have kept this plane from vanishing off US radar, Ethan snapped. And Rex hasn't left that alert posture since we boarded. Wolf raised a hand. And that's precisely the issue. He's been agitated the entire flight. That's not standard working canine behavior. Because this isn't a standard flight, Ethan shot back. You want him to sit pretty while a hijacking unspools under our feet? I want order, Wolf said. His voice cold now final. I'm relieving you of operational clearance. The marshals will escort you to economy seating. Rex will be placed under restraint at the galley until touchdown. Any further deviation, and you'll be removed at the next emergency landing. Ethan stared at him, disbelief flooding through the heat in his chest. Dana looked at him once, apologetically, but said nothing. One of the junior marshals stepped forward, placing a gentle but firm hand on Ethan's arm. Come on, Rourke, he said under his breath. It's not worth blowing protocol unless something actually explodes. Ethan didn't reply. He looked down at Rex, who met his eyes without blinking. And in that second, Ethan wanted to scream, wanted to shake the cockpit windows and shout the truth into the dead metal of the plane. But he knew bureaucracy too well. He had lost this round. He slowly unclipped Rex's vest latch, looped the secondary restraint to the handrail beside the galley, and gave the dog a subtle hand sign. Hold. Watch. Rex didn't move, only lowered his head slightly. Ears back but muscles still coiled like compressed steel. Ethan exhaled hard, turned, and allowed himself to be escorted toward the back of the plane. Past the tense passengers, past the curt glances and nervous whispers, all the way to row 22, where an open aisle seat waited with a tray table down and nothing but judgment in the eyes of the man across from it. He sat without speaking, glancing once over his shoulder toward the front. The galley wall blocked his view. He couldn't see Rex now, but he could feel him. 30 seconds passed, then 60, then it happened. A sharp metallic click echoed faintly from the front of the cabin, just loud enough to draw Ethan's attention. A sound he knew all too well, the disengagement of a tactical leash. His heart leapt into his throat. Somewhere up front a passenger gasped, then a bark, loud, guttural, immediate. Ethan was already on his feet, shoving past the marshal who had escorted him. When he saw it, Rex, unleashed, sprinting down the aisle with a speed that blurred his motion. The dog didn't bark again. He didn't hesitate. He leapt over a rolling drinks cart, veered past a seated passenger with a magazine clutched to her chest, and launched forward, slamming his body directly into a man in business class seat 3C, who had just shifted awkwardly and was fumbling beneath it. The man screamed as Rex knocked him sideways, one paw on his chest, jaws snapping not to bite but to warn, to pin. The entire front cabin erupted in chaos. The man flailed, hand emerging from his coat, and in that hand, half revealed before Rex snarled into his ear, was a Matto-based device with a red trigger guard, no larger than a TV remote. Ethan was there in 2 seconds. Weapon, he shouted, voice cracking like a whip through the aisle. Drop it, don't move. The passenger froze. His suit was rumpled, his expression twisted into panic. But it wasn't fear, it was calculation. He wasn't a random passenger. He had been waiting. Get your dog off me, the man screamed. He attacked without warning. He knows better than you do, Ethan snarled, drawing his sidearm and pressing it against the man's temple. Show me what's under your shirt now. The man hesitated, then reached up with his free hand and unzipped the inner lining of his jacket, revealing a thin vest of synthetic mesh laced with wiring and ceramic strips. Non-metal, flexible, molded to avoid detection. Embedded in the fabric was a small circuit board linked to the trigger in his right hand. A fail-safe detonation system. Son of a bitch, the marshal muttered from behind, hand now on his own weapon. That's military tech. How long was he sitting there? Dana's voice came in over the comms, panicked now. I don't see him on the high-hiss manifest. Because he wasn't on it, Ethan said, breathing hard. And he wasn't acting alone. He looked down at Rex, who was still growling low, teeth inches from the man's throat, tail stiff, every inch of him vibrating with readiness. He was waiting for a signal from her. Who? Dana asked. The missing flight attendant, Ethan replied, yanking the detonator free and tossing it to the marshal. This guy was her backup, insurance. If she failed in the reroute, he'd finish it the messy way. What do we do with him? the marshal asked. Secure him and get every passenger rechecked, Ethan said. Rex just exposed the tip of this damn iceberg. Then, from the cockpit speaker, Dana's voice cracked through again. Sharper now, more urgent. Ethan, you better get back up here, we've got another problem. She's no longer in the avionics bay. She's inside the pressure crawl space. And she's trying to force her way into the flight deck from below. Ethan didn't hesitate. The second Dana's voice came through his comms, raw and strained, his body was already in motion. She's under the deck, she'd said, trying to breach the cockpit from below. His feet hit the galley floor with a thud, breath short and burning, mind already calculating the fastest route down into the pressure crawl space. Behind him, the detained passenger in the shredded suit writhed under the weight of two marshals, blood trickling from his temple where Ethan had clipped him during the takedown. But Ethan didn't look back. He stormed past the bulkhead, passing startled crew members, sidestepping the drinks cart that had been abandoned mid-aisle, and knelt at the latch beneath the avionics access panel just behind the cockpit wall. He yanked the cover loose with one swift motion, the hinges protesting, and found the manual descent ladder folded flush to the side. Rex was already beside him, tail rigid, nose twitching at the scent of something Ethan couldn't register. Heat, adrenaline, perhaps the same faint chemical tang that had first triggered the anomaly hours earlier. You're going in, Ethan muttered, locking eyes with Rex. The dog didn't need the command repeated. Ethan slipped down the ladder into the underframe of the aircraft. The air thicker here, the whir of systems louder, wires bundled like veins overhead and along the sides. The space was tight, barely enough to move, and still warm from the presence of someone recently crawling through. He moved forward, then a sound. Metal creaking but not random, intentional. Sharp, like pressure being applied from beneath the cockpit floor. He pushed forward faster, hand grazing the sidewall for balance. And then he saw it. Just ahead, beyond a low structural beam, crouched in the shadows and halfway embedded into the floor panel above, was Sienna Kroll. Her hands were braced against the locking seal between the avionics bay and the pilot's potwell, a specialized torque driver clenched between her teeth. She was soaked in sweat, face calm, methodical, like a technician replacing a fuse instead of a hijacker about to breach command. Ethan raised his voice, steady but sharp. Sienna, step away from the panel. She turned her head slowly, removed the torque driver from her mouth, and smiled in the dim light. You're too late, she said. It's already done. Then she pressed a switch on a device strapped to her forearm, something Ethan hadn't seen until now, and the cockpit lights above flickered violently. Alarms triggered inside the systems. Dana's voice came through again, frantic. She's initiated an emergency override. Primary controls are locked out. I can't access manual flight. Get out of the cockpit, Ethan shouted. Seal it now. Already trying, Dana responded. But we're losing nav control, altitude's fluctuating. Ethan lunged forward, but Sienna was fast. She rolled sideways, kicked upward into the substructure, and vanished into the forward duct like a shadow absorbed into steel. Ethan climbed after her, but the crawl space ended in a dead end. She'd disappeared again, likely looped back through the maintenance shaft leading to cargo. Swearing under his breath, he dropped back into the ladder chute and climbed up. As soon as his boots hit the galley floor, everything shifted. The lights dimmed, a long groaning noise vibrated through the fuselage, and the plane tilted slightly to the right. Passengers screamed. Overhead bins shuddered. The entire aircraft responded like a living creature flinching under a sudden wound. Then came a different kind of scream, from the forward cabin. A sharp bark, a solemn... Ethan sprinted. In row 2D, a man in a dark gray three-piece suit had just risen, face twisted in panic. One of the agents had grabbed his arm, but the man jerked away and pulled something from beneath his coat. A slim black handheld device, metallic edges catching the light. Not a gun, not a blade, a transmitter. Ethan's thumb was already moving. A red diode lit on the device, but before he could press it, Rex struck. The dog lunged from behind the bulkhead, a blur of muscle and precision, launching through the air with a snarl that silenced the cabin. He clamped his jaws down on the man's wrist mid-mashing, twisting his body to drag the arm away from the device. The man screamed as his arm snapped at an unnatural angle, the transmitter flying from his hand and skittering across the aisle floor. A marshal dove and scooped it up instantly. "Don't touch the button," Ethan shouted, running forward. The marshal nodded, holding the device gingerly by its frame, its still hot active circuit. "Kill it," Ethan ordered. "Open the casing and disable the board." The tech reached into his jacket, pulled a blade and pried open the transmitter's housing with care, revealing a glowing internal node, blinking fast, far too fast. "It's a detonator signal," the tech muttered. "Short-range pulse." "You'd be falling in pieces," Ethan finished. He turned to Rex, who still had his jaws locked around the man's arm, applying just enough pressure to immobilize but not maim. "Good hold," Ethan said firmly. "Maintain." Rex released slightly but didn't back away. The man was sobbing now, sweat pouring down his face, pain and fear breaking through his composure. "I didn't know she'd go that far," he mumbled. "I was just the trigger." "Who else?" Ethan demanded. "How many more on board?" But the man shook his head, lips trembling. "Just us, me and her. She said if I didn't press it, she'd trigger it herself. She has the manual node." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Where?" "Cargo hold," the man gasped. "She wired it directly into the oxygen tanks." "God help us," the tech said under his breath. Ethan didn't wait. He turned on his heel and ran, yelling into his comm. "All units, we've got a secondary manual trigger in the rear cargo hold. She's going to blow it remotely, Rex with..." The dog released the man instantly and took off at Ethan's side, nails striking the floor like gunshots as they raced past rows of terrified passengers. Flight attendants pressed against walls, marshals spreading out to contain any additional threats. The corridor narrowed as they reached the service hatch leading down to cargo, and Ethan threw open with one yank, sliding down the built-in ladder without pause. Flashlight and sidearm both in hand. At the bottom, surrounded by crates and the low hum of stabilizers, stood Sienna. She was covered in grime, sweat staining her uniform, a wire clutched in her hand, its end buried in a black box strapped to the primary oxygen tank. She looked up at him, her eyes wild and shimmering. "Too late," she said softly. "We never wanted survivors." Ethan didn't blink as Sienna's fingers tightened on the ignition wire. His sidearm remained trained on her chest, arms locked, stance rooted, but his heart pounded like thunder behind his sternum. Rex stood at his heel, body low, lips peeled back in a silent snarl, blood already staining the fur around his neck where the blade had caught him during the last scramble. The room pulsed with oxygen pressure, each breath heavier than the last. "Don't," Ethan said, not as a threat, but a plea. One human being staring into the broken remnant of another. "You've lost this." "No," Sienna whispered, stepping back. "You think landing this plane will save anyone? They'll bury this like the others. There's no justice left, only silence." "You were supposed to protect lives," Ethan said. "You trained for that. You were one of us." "I was discarded like equipment," she spat, tears forming but not falling, like he was, her chin nodding toward the sky, toward Orloff, wherever they'd taken him. "You were tools. Now we break the machine." She yanked the wire. Nothing happened. Her face twisted, first in confusion, then terror. She looked down, realizing too late that the detonator had been disabled silently, surgically, by the Marshal's tech crew topside, just minutes before Ethan had made it to her. Her hesitation gave Ethan the breath he needed. He advanced 2 steps, gun still raised. "He's over," he said. "Let it go." But she screamed then, wordless, agonized, and lunged with a small blade pulled from inside her sleeve, a flicker of steel born out of grief, not tactics. Rex reacted faster than sound. The dog launched with a feral growl, intercepting her mid-swing, jaws clamping onto her arm, missing her off balance. The knife sliced through the air, missing Ethan's throat by inches before it tumbled harmlessly to the ground. Sienna went down, pinned by muscle and fang, arms trapped, fury gone. What was left was breath and regret. Ethan moved fast, calling Rex back, the command sharp but gentle. The dog responded, pulling away instantly, but not before her blade had found its mark, cutting deep along Rex's neck, just under the tactical collar. Blood bloomed too fast. Ethan's hands were already on the wound before Rex even whimpered, pressing hard, calling for medical on every frequency he had, but somewhere beneath his grip he knew The wound was deep, too deep, the rest unraveled in fast. Marshals stormed the cargo hold. Sienna was restrained. The aircraft was rerouted by emergency override, escorted by two F-18s back toward mainland. Flight 413 touched down at a secured military airstrip just outside San Diego. 41 minutes later, the gear shrieking as rubber met runway. The passengers were debris. The witness was extracted. The bombs, discovered and disarmed, were documented and sealed as evidence. But Ethan didn't leave the tarmac. He stayed beside the emergency vehicle where Rex lay still, chest rising shallowly, muzzle damp with blood and foam, eyes half-lidded. The vet crouched beside him, voice calm but grave. "We've slowed the bleeding, but even with surgery the damage to the artery is..." His head nudged forward until it rested gently against Ethan's palm, and then it stilled. 3 days later, the sky over the southern base was cloudless, sunlight pouring through the tree line where the memorial stood. A small garden reserved for canine service units, marked not by names but by collar tags hung from wooden posts. A grove where memory took root more than marble. Ethan stood alone beneath a sycamore tree, uniform pressed, hand trembling only slightly as he reached into his pocket and withdrew the black tactical collar, scored by tooth and time, still crusted faintly with blood. He stepped forward to the smallest stone, set beneath the largest branch. No words carved, just a single brass plate, K9 223R Rex, unit integrity absolute. He knelt, hooked the collar around the head of the stone, then sat back. His throat tightened, and for a long time he didn't say anything. Then, quietly, he murmured, "You don't need to follow orders anymore, Rex. You were more than a partner. You were the only one who always knew where the threat was, even when I couldn't see it. You did more than anyone on that plane. More than any of us." The wind passed gently through the trees, rustling leaves in soft applause. "You kept us all in the sky." Behind him, a marshal approached but didn't speak, just placed a folded flag near the stone and walked away. Ethan stayed, even after sunset, long after the wind had faded, because some missions don't end with sirens or medals. Some just end. If this story moved you, consider liking and subscribing for more cinematic, emotionally charged narratives like this one. We'd love to hear from you. What moment in the story hit you the hardest? Were you surprised by Rex's instincts? And where in the world are you watching from? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice is part of what keeps these stories alive.